The unlikely Toyota Yaris is the model that's been tasked with launching the Gazoo racing sub-brand in Europe. With a limited run of just 600 cars, 400 in Europe and a further 200 restyled versions for the Japanese market, it's more of a toe-in-the-water exercise than a full-on assault, but its character will set the tone for a raft of go-faster models from the Japanese firm. Aimed squarely at the likes of the Peugeot 208 GTI like Peugeot Sport and the forthcoming Fiesta Street, the Yaris hot hatch has been developed over 2 short years by a small team of dedicated car nuts who are keen to remind the world that Toyota still knows how to have fun. To this end, it packs a 209 bhp supercharged 1.8-litre 4-cylinder engine, a 6-speed manual gearbox, heavily revised suspension and a limited slip differential. Given the limited time and budget for its development, the Yaris is actually a real hoot. For starters, it's genuinely quick, the mix of fizzy motor and closely stacked ratios making for rapid progress. And while the chassis lacks the ultimate finesse and poise of the 208D, it makes up for that with an infectious appetite for fun. Whereas the Peugeot remains a little aloof until you really dig deep, the Yaris eggs you on from the moment you prod the starter button. Perhaps more amazing still is how Gazoo Racing has turned the roughest of super mini sales ears into a really desirable silk purse. It's not cheap and they're all sold out, but the Yaris grmn deserves consideration among the top tier of hot hatches. At £26,295, the Toyota Yaris grmn is an expensive go-faster super mini. As a comparison, the Peugeot 208D by Peugeot Sport, the only real alternative, is £23,550, which is hardly a bargain price. However, this financial argument is largely academic, because all the UK cars have been sold. And while the Yaris isn't cheap, it does feel like a special car that's been engineered by people who understand the thrill of driving. While we eagerly await the Ford Fiesta Street, the Yaris just edges the Peugeot as our favorite pocket-sized funster. Hum the starter button and the 2ZR fires keenly, idling with a note that's more vocal than the Peugeot 208Ts but a fair bit quieter than an earlier prototype we drove. It's a joy to work the grmn's engine hard. It's not just a means of getting along the straight sections of a road quickly, but rather something that's a source of satisfaction itself just to deploy. Clearly, it lacks the lowdown punch of some, but the mid-range is surprisingly effective, and most of all, it loves to be extended between 5,000 to 7,000 revolutions per minute. While there is the distant characteristic whine of a supercharger at lower revs, it's the rush of compressed air and exhaust blare that you hear towards the red line. Crispness of response is its major advantage, complemented by a slick and precise gear change. The car's outright performance figures are competitive rather than startling, with a 0 to 62 mph dash taking a claimed 6.3 seconds, although the fact the sprint-geared Yaris won't crack 60 mph in second, requiring a change to third, means this is a pretty impressive effort. Top speed is electronically pegged at 143 mph. The Yaris grmn is in many ways defined by its 2ZR 1.8-litre supercharged engine. It's a type of power plant unique in the current hot match market, and while it uses forced induction, its throttle response is superior to that of rivals that are all turbocharged. It's powerful too, with a peak output of 209 bhp and a slightly less impressive 184 pounds-foot maximum torque output developed at a high 5,000 revolutions per minute. Considerable work was needed to fit the big unit in the nose of the Yaris, with many of the challenges revolving around heat management and maintaining emissions compliance. The Magnuson-Eaton supercharger, its intercooler, and the air intake are packaged as one, slotting down into the front of the engine bay. The exhaust was a particular headache, as there was no provision for the necessary shape and diameter of a performance pipe with a standard Yaris underfloor. The only transmission option is a 6-speed manual with a close ratio gear set. This drives the front wheels through a Torsen limited slip differential. In normal driving, the grmn is surprisingly undemanding, with a ride that, while possessing an underlying firmness, is far from uncomfortable. There is perhaps a fraction more weight to the steering, but there's still a slightly artificial manner to the way it self-centers and, in fact, during those first few degrees of lock when you turn into a corner. It's a glassy, remote kind of sensation, which on cold, wintry roads makes it easy to overcommit on the amount of steering lock required, and therefore overload the front tires, which clearly don't have the outright grip of the Michelin Supersports used by the Peugeot 208D. Nevertheless, get through this phase and it's clear that the nose does stick, and the Yaris grmn can be thrown down a road with manic enthusiasm, revs flaring, nose gently taut, steering under power but never requiring a firm hand, and all at very high speed. The grmn engineers have consciously settled on a chassis tune that's playful, but also one that strikes a fine balance between interaction, adjustability and confidence breeding stability. It's appreciably less tail-happy than the 208, but no worse for it. Perhaps the only real criticism is that the Yaris seems to quickly run out of suspension travel, which is no doubt down to the many limitations of the standard car. It never gets unruly and there's just enough control at the very limit of compression, but it can sap a little confidence when really attacking a bumpy section of road. A 280 is more controlled in similar conditions, but this poise comes at the expense of some communication at more realistic everyday speeds. The grmn is based on a humble Yaris, so you'd expect it to be relatively cheap to run, and based on the claimed figures, you'd be right. At pumps, Toyota says you'll see a return of 37.7 miles per gallon, while CO2 emissions run to 170 grams/km. However, work the supercharged unit hard and the fuel consumption will drop to the mid to high 20s, which isn't so bad in itself, but when it's combined with a measly 35-litre tank, you'll find that the Yaris will barely go 200 miles between refills.